and you would like to follow along, we're in Luke chapter 9. That's where we're going to be spending our time today. This is one of the miracles that Jesus does that's kind of one of those that if you've been in church as a child, you know this one. Everybody knows about the fishes and the loaves. And what's significant about this particular miracle is this is of all the miracles, there are 38 recorded miracles that I'm aware of. Now, somebody may have a different count in the New Testament Gospels that Jesus performed. I'm sure there were many that didn't get recorded. John says so. This is the only one that all four Gospels contain, which is significant somehow. I wonder about that. Why is it that the four Gospel writers, who all have a different perspective on who Jesus is and what he was doing. I mean, every ancient historian, when they write, they all have a different take on what's important. That's the way ancient history was written. And they look at the various miracles, and each one records different ones. There are things that Luke records that Mark doesn't have, things that John gets that Matthew didn't get, and all of them combined in that way. But this one they all four got for some reason. And this need that Jesus meets on this day, I find very interesting because these people are not starving. This is not a desperation miracle. It's done for a different purpose. So let's take a look at the text. I'll begin reading in verse 10. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had been doing. So he took them with him and withdrew themselves to a town called Bethsaida, to a quiet place. But the crowds learned about it, and they followed them there. Jesus welcomed the crowds and spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and he healed all of those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 disciples came to Jesus and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside to find food and lodging, because we're in a very remote place here." Jesus replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We've only got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Unless we go and buy food for this crowd," and the crowd was about 5,000 men. Now that's important. You got to remember, the patriarchal society in which they live records 5,000 men. Well, that means the crowd's probably 15,000 people because of the women and children. Jesus said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of 50 each." And the disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Taking up the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up into heaven, Jesus gave thanks. He broke the bread and gave it to them. He gave to the disciples to set before all of the people, and they did so. Everyone ate and was satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basket loads of leftovers and distributed them among themselves. So here they are. They've been doing all the things they've been doing. They've been traveling. The disciples have just come back from being sent out. So they've spent, and I don't know how long they were out. It could have been a day, it could have been 2 weeks, could have been a month. That they've been going out and doing the work that Jesus sent them to do, which is heal people, pray for people, give people the gospel, all of the things that Jesus had been doing, he sends them out to do. And they've been doing that. And they come back, and this crowd has found them. They're trying to get away from the crowd. Now, how do I know that? Well, first of all, they deliberately go out to a place that says, around Bethsaida, that the scripture says is a deserted place. Why did they do that? Well, I can only relate to it personally. I can't relate to it any other way. When we were traveling, and we'd be out for 2 or 3 months at a pop. And when the sponsors would come to us, let's say we get up at 5 in the morning, we travel for 9 hours to the next concert date. We'd get there, the sponsors would meet us. And the happiest thing they could say to us, the happiest thing that I could, in my mind, for me, was they handed us a card that got us into a hotel room. Because if they didn't, that meant all the band members would go to various people's homes. Now, look, the lodging was fine. I mean, people put us up nicely in their homes. No complaint there. But I knew, see, we travel all day. We go set up the equipment 2 or 3 hours. We've got to interact with the sponsors while we're doing that, because that's what you do, right? I mean, what if you came in here on a Sunday and I just said, "Oh, it's you"? And I just turn and walk away from you. I mean, you'd think, well, what's wrong with Rip? So we had to be what I call on for people. And we would set the equipment up, we'd sound check it, then we'd go to dinner and eat with the group. There might be 30, 40 people eating with us, so we had to be on for them. Then we did the concert, and afterward, people would come up on stage and talk to us for another hour or more while we were gathering the equipment. Then we'd pack all the equipment up and take it back and put it in the truck. And if we were staying in their homes, guess what happened? We might sit up till midnight because they want to hear all about what it's like to travel with a band. And so when they said, here's your hotel room card, I just thought, I get to go and just look at the ceiling for a couple of hours after we get done with this concert. That's what these guys are doing. Look at what they say. What do they say? Let's send them back to town so they can get some food and lodging. In other words, can we get rid of them? I mean, we've been with them all this time, and we've done all this work for all this time, and now we're just ready to be quiet for a little while. And Jesus says, no, you feed them. Oh, and I can't imagine being a disciple and having that said to me. I mean, it would be like I had traveled all night, and we'd done this before, and we get to the place where we're going, and they say, there are 3 flights of stairs for the equipment to go up to. So we moved the 3 tons of equipment up 3 flights of stairs. That's what we're told after we've traveled all night long. That would have been the way this would have felt. Well, they take up the little bit of food. All we got are these loaves and fishes, Jesus. This is where the miracle comes in, of course. And Jesus does that miracle. He breaks the bread. And you notice that he blesses it. That was a very Jewish thing to do. If in the Jewish mind, if you didn't thank God, what does it mean to say grace? That's a phrase we use that here, don't we? I don't even know what it means. I've been a Christian for 36 years, and I still don't know what that means. But I do know what it means to say thank you to God for the food. I know what that means. And that's what Jesus did. And so for the Jewish mind, if you didn't thank God for the food, you were robbing him of the food. Isn't that significant? So that's what he does. And there's a significant aspect to this text that you may not be aware of. I wasn't aware of it until recent years. In the Jewish mind, when the kingdom of God comes to the earth, the Jews are looking for the kingdom of God coming to the earth just as we do. When it happens, there's going to be more food than anybody can eat. That's part of what the Jews were looking for. This idea of shalom incorporates the fact that everybody's got more food than they know what to do with. And it never runs out forever. That's the significance here. And Jesus then, he's doing something here that speaks a sermon greater than any sermon that somebody could stick together with words. I think about it in terms of like a mom. I mean, you think what a mom does for a family. I mean, you talk about sacrificing. I mean, the picture of God, Jesus uses that picture, doesn't he? He says, how often I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her brood, but you would not come. That picture of a mom and the sense of sacrifice that mothers make from the beginning of the 9-month period until the child is gone and on past that. The sacrifice still takes place. I think about Jo. She's not here today. She sacrifices herself as a mother for families that aren't even her own family. So actions many times preach the greatest sermons, and Jesus here is taking an action. He's done an action here by not turning the crowd away and by saying, we're going to feed you. Did you know that right now on the earth, you may not be aware of this, but some of you you're really smart people, so I bet you do know this already, and you're just going to go, oh man, tell us something we don't know. On the earth right now, there is more than enough food to feed all 7.25 billion people on the planet fully, with leftovers. Did you know that? There's more food on the planet than we need. The problem isn't the food. The problem is us. When you go to a country like, let's say Malawi, inner Africa, they're landlocked, little tiny country, very poor. Let's say they have a famine because there's no rain that season. There's plenty of food for all the people in Malawi, it's just in other places. The problem is human selfishness, that we just can't get it to them. The earth is capable of producing more food than everybody needs. I remember when I first came here, this field, I used to watch this field across here. And the first fall that I was here, and I'm thinking it was the fall, I noticed them planting all the yellow squash out there. And the squash came in. And I saw the guys out one Sunday. I came here and there were these trucks with trailers and a bunch of people picking the squash and tossing them into these trailers. And I thought, wow, look at that. And the next Sunday I came and I looked up the rows, and all the places up where the trucks go, there would be a pile of squash knee deep. Several of them. And I thought to myself, look at all that squash. I mean, every one of those piles would fill a pickup truck. What happens to it? And I remember asking Ed, he said, well, they just plowed under. I thought, man, you could feed half the county with just the squash in this one field. But the reason they can't get it to people is because the distribution isn't profitable for the farmers to do that at all. And I understand that. I'm not criticizing it. What my point is, there's more food on the planet than the planet can eat. What does that mean? It means God is taking care of everybody still to this day. This planet provides more than we need already, still. God's love for humanity is so deep that He has given us a world wherein there's more than we need. That's pretty amazing. In John chapter 6, this same miracle is recorded, and it's a little boy that comes up with the food, brings Andrew the baskets, the fish and the loaves. And when asking for miracles, I wonder if we don't ask for miracles, that we don't look at it in the way that we ought. Like, for instance, in this text, what I notice about it is they come with everything that's earthly possible first. And that's the fishes and the loaves. They take everything they got and they bring it, and then they exhaust it. We got 15,000 people, 5 fish or 2 fish and 5 loaves are not going to come anywhere near that, but we'll give it. I mean, there are a lot of sermons crafted around that little boy, the fact that the little boy brings everything he has to God. I think that's a significant thing, because I think, biblically speaking, looking at this text, when we want something from God, do we exhaust all of the earthly possibilities we have first? I don't think we do. You know why? Because we ask God to tinker around the edges of life. In other words, how many of us come to a place in life, think about this, wherein we want something from God and we're willing to just throw ourselves on the altar and take whatever comes? In other words, everything I am, I'm just going to throw myself on the altar and let God sort it out. That's really not the way we go about it most of the time. We kind of want God to take the life we've got, right? I do. I'm saying this for myself. Take the life that I'm already living, the stuff that I like, I'd like to keep all that. And then the stuff that you could help me with, if you tinker around the edges a little bit and help me with that stuff, I'd be really happy. Then I could have the good stuff I already have and whatever good stuff you'll give me on top. And you don't see that here. You see them saying, here's all we got. A few loaves, a few fish, take it. There's no sense. So think of that. If you're the person with the baskets, right? It's your food. And you just hand it over. And you don't know what's going to happen. I think about it in terms of, for instance, all right, what happens? Jesus feeds them. If you go to the other gospel renderings of this text, what happens after they're fed? They start following Him. Thousands of people are following Jesus around now wherever He goes. And then Jesus turns to them and says some really hard things, and all the crowd disappears. I think about that in terms of today. We have what's called, and it's been with us now for 35 or 40 years, the prosperity gospel, which says, look, if you'll just put in, God will put out. And if you just put a little here, God will give you whatever you want. And that just sounds like that to me. Jesus turns to them and says, why are you following me? You're following me because I fed you, not because of me. You're just following me because you saw the good stuff. In other words, let's chase Jesus down, because if we'll hang around Jesus, we'll always have plenty to eat. Everything will be good. All our needs will be met. And they're not following him because of who he is. So the disciples came to this moment. They've been working all this time. They want to send the crowd away. They're exhausted. They don't have enough food for them. They give the food up they do have. They exhaust everything they have, including themselves. And then there's this incredible miracle. How many of you in this room have read Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place? Wow. Okay. In the book, Corrie ten Boom is a Christian. She's a Dutch Christian living in the time of World War II. And her family, as believers, they do something really, really risky. They hide Jews. That's what they do. And finally, this was a tension for Corrie ten Boom. This is an interesting concept too. You see it in Rahab, the harlot, in the Old Testament. The Gestapo come to the door and they ask Corrie ten Boom directly, "Are you hiding Jews?" And Corrie ten Boom, the Christian, thinks, how am I going to lie? I can't lie. But I can't turn these people over. And so she sorts through that properly, just like Rahab the harlot. She does lie to the Gestapo because that's what you should do. Right? The greater good, the godly good is that these Jews are kept safe. So she does lie. And then they finally get caught harboring the Jews. And Corrie ten Boom and her whole family are shipped off to concentration camps. Loses her whole family, loses her sister, watches her sister die in the camps. Now when somebody comes up in front of you as a preacher or a teacher or an evangelist on TV and they say to you, "Oh, just take God's promises and put them to work and your life will be great." You know, when I hear that from somebody I don't know anything about, here we go, you're sitting there, let's say that I could be two people and I could sit there and I heard me say that. I wouldn't listen, I wouldn't hear that. It would be like nothing was said to me. I'd say, yeah, right. God's promises and everything's going to be great, sure. And I'd go home and go about the rest of my life. But when Corrie ten Boom says it, it means something. In a concentration camp, there's one portion in the book where in the concentration camps, hygiene was not very good. And they are covered with fleas. All the women in this dormitory sleeping in the bunks, you've probably seen the pictures of Auschwitz and the various camps where they harbored the Jews during World War II in Germany. They're in the bunks, their bodies are covered with fleas. And they can't, what are they going to do? They got no way to get rid of them. And she thanked God for the fleas because now the guards won't even come in there anymore. So when Corrie ten Boom says, and this is her quote, "Let God's promises shine on your problems," I can listen to that. She says it means something. Sometimes it sounds like pie in the sky, but when we've exhausted everything we have, it's not pie in the sky. Not pie in the sky at all. Jesus' response to the disciples, I try to put myself in that spot and I say, okay, I got these few fish, these few loaves of bread. I'm looking at this 15,000 strong crowd of people and Jesus says, "You feed them?" I don't know that I would have just laughed. I mean, it just sounds so crazy to me that should be the case. And then when it happens, what's so remarkable is the disciples, when they leave, are still 12. 15,000 people get fed. Nobody can explain such a miracle by natural means, right? Jesus did something extraordinary here. But still 12 followers, no more. No more are willing to follow him on the basis of just who he is. So where do we find ourselves today as we look for God's supply? I'll tell you one of the most fascinating things that being in school has done for me is I've been forced to read theologies from other countries. There are the little country Chad in inner Africa. There are Chadian theologians. And they look at the same Bible and they interpret it in a very different way than we do. In terms of things like this. They look at this miracle and they say, God is going to take care of our food needs. That's how they see it. Because of how they live day to day, not knowing if that day they're going to have sufficient food. Is that part of this passage? You better believe it is. Are they wrong to interpret the Bible that way? No. No. Our Western European way of interpreting the Bible is no more right than the little pastor in Chad as he or she interprets the Bible. No more right. So it does speak to the practical, but then it speaks to something else as well. Jesus said something very significant, and I pass this along to you not because it's me, because it's Jesus. He says, if the light that is in you is darkness, how great that darkness is. In other words, if the things that we think are right aren't, then that's a darkness that light just about can't overcome, right? I mean, it's kind of like Al Capone. You remember Al Capone? You know, he was a Catholic. And there are lots of born-again Catholic Christians all over this world. Al Capone thought that it was okay to kill people or threaten them as long as you took some of the money and did something good with it. If the light that's in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And sometimes our connection with what we need or we think we need in our lives is so severe that our conscience then, that voice of God in us, deceives us into thinking something is right when it's not right. And we can make decisions about life that entangle us in things that we spend a lifetime trying to correct and get out of. Aesop tells this fable. Everybody's heard of Aesop's fables, right? Okay. Aesop was a Greek fable writer, and I love these fables. As everybody's heard of Bullwinkle, right? They had a segment on Bullwinkle that was Aesop's fables. I used to love Bullwinkle. I like the name of the guy. That was always it cracks me up, and I'm 60 years old. Fearless Leader. That was his name, Fearless Leader. Anyway, so in Aesop's fable, there's a war, and the birds think that they're in charge of the jungle. And the beasts on the floor of the jungle think they're in charge. And so in order to find out who's in charge, they go to war. The birds and the beasts go to war. Well, then the bat shows up. And the bat can pretend to be like a bird. So he pretends to be like a bird when he's with the birds. But then, when things aren't working out for the birds, he goes down to the forest floor and walks around like a beast. And so he pretends to be a beast. And that works for him for a long time, but then all of a sudden, the birds and the beasts get wind of what's happening, and they both kick the bat out. That's kind of like us. We go through this world, and we do not exhaust ourselves on behalf of living rightly before God, because it's costly. It costs something. We talked about it in Sunday school this morning. There was a man that built a castle, and I had never heard of this before, but this used to be a pretty common practice. They would stretch wires in places where they could, and it would be like a wind chime. They would stretch them to certain pitches, and this guy made what's known as an Aeolian harp. Now, the Aeolian scale, I could show you on the piano what it sounds like. It's just the minor key scale. So you got certain wires tuned to certain pitches, and when they all sound at once, you get the full Aeolian scale, and it's really pretty. And so he built a castle with 2 towers, and he had his servants stretch wires hundreds of feet across these towers and tune them all to pitch. Well, it was summertime when they finished, and there's not a lot of wind, and so the thing didn't do anything. It just hung there. Birds lit on it and stuff like that, but it didn't make any sound. Then the fall came, and all of a sudden, it started to barely whisper. But when the gales of winter came, it made music. In other words, the picture is, look, this world is just a scary, scary place, and we all have to live in it. And there are lots of things in life that come into our lives that we have no control over. Talk to anybody who was walking around happily on Thursday, and on Friday morning they're lying in a hospital bed with something that's happened to their body. They don't know why. They don't have any explanation for it. They didn't do anything. But there they are. But you see, this is the way it is with God. It's not until we exhaust ourselves. When we do, God shows up. He will show up. That's what Corrie ten Boom's little quote, God's promises shine on our problems, mean. So when we find ourselves frustrated as a believer, and we think, gosh, if only God would help me with this or help me with that. Man, I can't encourage us enough. Bring those things to God. But when things don't work out just the way we thought, it's not because God doesn't care about what we're going through. It may be that God is going to bring us to a place where every resource we have is exhausted. And then when He shows up, it really, really means something to us. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question you want